Hi, I'm Rachel with Patterns and Pixels Canada, and this week I will be working on week 3 of my mystery winter quilt from Threads That Bind in Maxwell. Let's get started. Okay, it's time to start the third week of the Winter Mystery Quilt. In here, this is the bag that I received from Threads That Bind in Maxwell, and I'm keeping everything in here because this is an 8-week mystery quilt, and I want to make sure that I don't misplace anything in the sewing room. So in here, I have what I created during the first week, these 2 different blocks, and what I created during the second week were 3 different strip sets. And I will link the video to both of these. I will link to both of these videos in the description below. But today is week 3. Okay. So definitely more fabric. And then something sort of rectangular shaped. Find out what that is. Oh, no knee needles. Well, that's perfect. And actually, while I think about it, I think it's been a while since I've changed the needle in my machine. Whoopsies, I should probably get on and do that. Then I have, my same 3 fabrics. I have my whites, my light blue, and my medium blue. And the instructions for this week say I'm making combination square triangles, or CST. Now, I haven't made those before, but it looks like I sort of have a half square triangle on one side, and then they're talking about drawing a perpendicular line for a piece of fabric on the other side. The picture looks simple enough. So I'm going to start with getting the fabric cut the way they are asking, and then I will take a closer look at how I sew the pieces to make combination square triangles. Before I started cutting this particular strip of fabric, I wanted to show you something that has happened in the preparation of this week's pack. I've pressed the fabric and I've come to my cutting board to line up my fabric to cut it to the size that the instructions have asked for. But as you can see, my fabric is not lining up with the grid. It has quite a significant curve to it. This happens when fabric is cut while still folded. So if I take this piece and fold it in half, which is the way it was when I took it out of the packet, it actually does line up straight along the line. But because it was cut while it was folded, when you open it up, you get this curve to it. I do try when I'm doing my cuts not to cut on fabric that's folded to help try and avoid this problem. Now, obviously, with the limitations of the size of our cutting mats, you will sometimes have to fold your fabric to cut it because otherwise it's not going to fit on your cutting mat. If that's the case, the best you can do is all of that sort of preparatory work that sometimes we do skip over as quilters because we want to get to the fun sewing part. And that preparatory work is making sure that you've washed and dried your fabric. Maybe you've also used best press on it to help keep everything tight and straight as you're cutting. If you are having to fold it to cut it, I would recommend ironing it to keep it as flat, ironing it along the fold to keep it as flat as you can. And then the other thing that quilters are, we tend to do, and we don't mean to, when we go to do our cutting, we'll put our rulers on, and then we're pulling on the fabric to get it to fit the way we want. When you have fabric folded and you start pulling on it like that, that's when you start to have things shifting and you don't realize until you've opened it up. So try as hard as you can just to press the ruler down rather than to pull and stretch anything while you're cutting. Obviously, having a sharp blade in your rotary cutter will help to ensure that you have one nice, neat cut. In terms of what I'm left with today, I'm going to take a look at the instructions and what they want. They want squares cut. So I'm going to be, instead of just being able to just whoosh right across and cut my squares, I'll have to sort of go slowly, and I might not even use this centerpiece. Once I get down to here, I then might turn the fabric and line it up and then cut this next bit. I have found that Threads That Bind has been generous with their fabric, so I should have enough when I'm doing this. It'll just be slower going as I try to take into account this curve. I have all the fabric cut and ready to go. Fortunately, I had enough of each of the strips that I was able to cut into the center where the curve was. And then these bits that I've got left over here are that bendy curve in the center. I'll hold on to them in case they prove useful for something. But for this particular week, I won't need them. The first set of instructions says to use just my 2 different shades of blue to make 12 half square triangles. So I'll quickly go through and do that. That I know how to do. The next step after that is where I then include the white to make these combination square triangles. So I'll read the instructions a few times before I go ahead and do that. So let's get started with that and see what I end up with. I have all of the half square triangles sewn, and I have chosen to iron them open. I just prefer that. I find it sits flatter when I'm doing the rest of my work. The next step for this week's pattern is to take the half square triangles that I've made, as well as the sort of full-size squares that I've cut in the white, and to put them right sides together, and then stitch the same way I did here, but now coming across this direction. Once I do that, this is what the block will look like. I've got the 2 seams where I will then just cut between the 2 of them. When that's finished and I'm able to open it out, that's where I get the combination half square triangle. Very exciting for me. This is the first time I have done this shape before. The next step, once I've sewn all of these as to combination half square triangles, when they look like this, is to trim them down to size. Now this one I have already done, but I wanted to show you how it was that I was able to trim this accurately, so that way my seams lined up at the corners the way I wanted them to. What I decided to do was use some painter's tape and actually mark off the 3.5 inch square that I need for this shape. That way, when I was positioning my block, I can use this center line to make sure I'm lining up with the center of my 2 pieces here. And then now what I'm doing is I'm looking at the corner where the tape meets the edge of the ruler. And I'm just adjusting my ruler so that way it lines up with where my white and blue fabric meets. And then it should, if I follow, I can see that I've hit the cross sections all the way through like this. So I know that when I trim this side and the top, my white and blue will meet up nicely in a corner like this. And then because I'm following that diagonal line, I know that my corner point here will also line up neatly with the corner. When I had first started trying to cut this square without having the painter's tape on the ruler, I was finding it a bit confusing to try and make sure that I was lining up all of my points. And I found the tape just really helped to focus where I was looking on my work. And I do prefer to use a larger ruler like this because it gives me more surface area to hold on to. So the next job now is to get all of these pieces sewn with the whites into combination half square triangles and get them trimmed down to 3.5 inches. So I've got the blocks made and I've come to do the pressing. To help get my block as flat as possible, I've decided to do fanning or twirling the seams. And to accomplish that, I do need to do a little bit of cutting. So if you take a block, like so, I don't want to have to bend or fold it over all one direction. It makes it too thick here in the center. Just make sure that's in shot. There we go. So what I'm going to do is find the edge of my seam allowance and just do a little snip to my stitching line, obviously being careful not to cut my stitching line. Turn it over, same thing on that side. And now that centerpiece is separate from the edges, the rest of my seam allowance, which means I can fold one way and one the other way. And then that's where you get that twirling of your seam allowances going around. So I'm going to come back to the front and just finger press that. That one's going to go that direction. And then check this side. That one's going to go that way. And then this next step can be a bit fiddly. I want to open the center part up. Again, the whole point is to make it as flat as possible. I'm just going to snip the connection I have, the stitching I have between the blocks. It was from this line of stitching, so cutting that isn't going to unravel anything because this line of stitching encases everything. And here's the fiddly bit, is trying to get this to open flat and then press it without burning your fingers. So just get the iron to start, and there we go, okay. Manage that. And it just helps to remove as much of that bulk as possible from the center of your block so that when you come to quilt it, this center bit is lying as flat as possible. There's nothing wrong if I were just to perhaps keep that all connected and press it one direction. But there is quite a bump here because of all that fabric in the center. And if I can get rid of that, it does lie a little bit flatter, which is really what we want to have for our quilting process. So I'm now going to continue that with my other blocks and then see what the next step is. I now have my 3.5-inch blocks that were left over, finished and ready to go. The rest of them were sewn into larger blocks with a bit of a spiral pattern inside. I have 5 of them. The next set of instructions say to cut strip set B. Now that I had made in a previous week. These are the blocks from week 1. I don't need those. Week 3. Oh no, that should be week 2. No, I wrote the label wrong. Okay, these are week 2. Strip set C. Strip set B. That looks like that one. It says just to cross cut it and then set it aside again for another week. Okay. Start with getting a nice straight edge to work with. I know some of you at home might have those strip rulers, which would work just fine in this situation, except I don't have one. So we're going to go old school and just use a normal ruler. One, two, three, 4, 6. Five and a little bit left. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that is everything for this week finished. I have my extra blocks, the strips cut, and 5 of block 4. I'm going to get everything labeled, get it back into the bag where I'm keeping everything together, and that'll be my mystery quilt finished for this week. If you have enjoyed watching me create this week and you'd like to see other videos that I've made, remember to hit that like, subscribe, and bell notification. Bye.